Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining us at www.sonic-cinema.com. We're about to switch over to the month of October, and for me and many others, that means a plethora of horror movies throughout the month of October up until Halloween. And this year is going to be no different for me. I'll talk about that later on in the month. To start, I wanted to do an interview with a fellow online critic who I've gotten to know over the past couple of years. His website is called Death Ensemble. It specializes in horror films and horror discussions on the horror genre and horror filmmakers, and it's really exciting to have him on here. We're going to talk about his website. We're going to talk about uh, what led him to horror, and then we're just going to sort of talk about our own experiences with the horror genre and sort of where we got our starts. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Phil Faso. We're coming up on the month of October, and October means horror movies for a lot of film fans. And I wanted to take this opportunity to talk to somebody who I've come to know online for the past couple of years. He's a film critic, film writer, and horror fan in general. And his website is Death Ensemble. And please welcome to the podcast, Phil Faso. Phil, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Brian. As I said to you when you first called me, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. When I was thinking about podcasts to do for this time of month, it just for this time of year, just it felt like this would be probably a pretty good discussion to have, since you're pretty big into horror genre, and I mean your website, for people who aren't familiar with it, specializes in talking about horror filmmakers, horror films, and just everything associated with horror. So I mean, this felt like a really good fit, and plus, I mean, this is one of those cases where I get to talk to somebody in real life as opposed to just online. So I mean, I was really excited to be able to do this with you.
Well, it's always nice to be able to make that connection with somebody. I met you through Heather, who is a great friend of mine, and another person that I've actually never met in person. That's the way the world's going today. But it's one of those things where the internet really can be a positive, and it's just not white noise. When I'm able to sit and talk to somebody like you, who's a horror fan, obviously, and you're very much into film and film critique, and I think that we're gonna have a fun time here today.
Yeah. So first of all, like I said before, your website is Death Ensemble, and what inspired you to want to write about film? What inspired you to centralize on horror in particular?
There are some things in my life that are very close to me, and I've been writing since my mom read me my first Curious George book when I was a kid. I've always had a great imagination, and horror has always appealed to me. And as I got into, other areas of writing, I mean, I've written all sorts of stuff over my life: poems, novels, short stories. And about 10 years ago, I was going to a bunch of horror conventions at the time, and I happened to come across a guy who is now a great friend of mine, Mike Cuccinata, and another guy, Rob Galuzzo, were running a site called Icons of Fright. And oddly enough, I'd seen pictures of them online. It just happened to be patrolling the internet and came across Icons. And then I was in the mall about 10 years ago looking to buy a Slayer t shirt in Hot Topic, and lo and behold, there's Mike Cuccinata behind the counter. So I'm just like, hey, dude, you Icons of Fright, don't you? He's like, yeah, yeah. So, I was talking to him, and I happened to be going to a horror convention, I guess like a month or two later. And I just reached out. I said, Mike, I don't know if you have anybody going to this convention. Would you like me to cover it? I'd wanted to get into blogging at that point, and didn't really have the knowledge or the wherewithal or even the connections to really start right. So Mike said, "No, we don't have anybody covering it." And then I took a bunch of pictures, wrote up a two-page write-up, and Mike loved my writing. He always has, and he's always been a huge supporter of mine with blogging. And he's just a generally great guy. So a couple weeks later, he sent me an email saying, "Hey Phil, our guy who was doing our DVD reviews just basically cut out on us for another site. Would you like to become our DVD review guy?" I said, "Yeah, sure." Again, it was like, okay, so what are the parameters here? And the parameters were, well, you know what, we like your writing, so write in any style you want and review any movies you want as long as they're horror. So that pretty much left it wide open for me. And the nice thing about Icons was that Rob and Mike at the time let me pretty much have free reign. I could write whatever I want. I chose my own topics. I was always worried about that with which is one of the reasons I've never even tried to write for any of the quote unquote major sites. It's just that they have mandates and this is what we want you to write and here's your word count and cover this and blah, blah, blah. With Mike and Rob, it was always, all right, well, we're friends here. You're a talented writer, Phil. We like what you do and, just take it any direction you want. So through some machinations over the years, I was with Icons for, I guess, about 4 years. And then, they'd gone through some changes and I became their editor in chief for a while. And the site really wasn't what I was looking to make out of it. So I ended up parting ways with them. And I'm like, well, I have some options here. I can, write for the big boys and, have my writing just not be what I want it to be. I can, have some smaller sites that I have connections on, so I can contribute to those. Make friends and networking over the years by going to conventions and writing online. Or I could start my own site. And the thing was, the only option that I wasn't even considering was, hey, you know what? I'm not going to write on the internet anymore. That's not even an option. So Death Ensemble became my thing, and I came up with the tagline, "Your vital source for interesting perspectives on horror." Now, again, I don't think my website is anywhere near vital to anybody's life, but, I like that I give people an outside perspective. I'm not the corporate. I'm not, not giving you what everyone else is giving you. And I like to give my friends and, people an opportunity to write and express their views on it. And actually, you've written for me actually, so you know exactly what I'm talking about here, Basically, hey, listen, I made some connections here. You have some good points of view. Feel free to I'm always willing to give people an opportunity, because I think it's great, So that's how Death Ensemble came about.
Yeah, and I mean, and the thing is, it's like when I started writing about film, it was I had already become really, really interested in film and really passionate about film, and then basically I started doing these like short reviews for the Atlanta Journal Constitution here for like their UB the Critic, like you know just regular people saying in reviews and stuff like that. That's how I started writing about
Sure.
reviews, and then writing reviews, and then basically I eventually gravitated towards longer form reviews, and then around 2000 or so was while I was in college, I had the idea of doing a website, and originally was going to be focused more on my music, which was my main focus, but I mean, over the years, I mean, obviously the movie reviews have been a huge part of it, and
Sure.
then I've done different types of blogs, I've done different types of uh, end of year and all of that stuff. I started doing a movie a week about 8-10 years ago, even though that's kind of hysterical, the idea that I could call the movie a week at this point, because there are some times where I go like weeks before even touching a movie in that list. But no, and the fact of the matter is it just it was something that the more I got into it, I mean, I always really enjoyed it. I enjoyed having that outlet of just expressing myself about films. I mean, like you said, I wrote a remembrance for you of Wes Craven a couple of years ago when he passed away. that you post on Death Ensemble, and we met through Heather, and she was the one who approached me about that, and I was excited just to be able to write it and to have somebody else post it, and it's like that. That's one of those. It's one of those things where it's like sometimes you just having connections like that happen through other people is just really really great, and it's one of the things that's really helped expand my 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 ability to talk about films and talk about different types of films and talk to filmmakers and actors and all of that stuff, and being able to communicate with other critics, and even just commenting on Facebook statuses has always been a lot of fun as far as horror when it comes to just you and I talking about movies.
Sure, and that's one of the things that, if you look at the title of my website, Death Ensemble, I really just, I do 98.7% of the writing for it, I don't have many outside people, but it's when people do want to write for me, I embrace that nature of, hey, here's a voice that's not Phil Fasso's voice,
Mm-hmm.
and I will happily post things that I don't, like my friend Nicole has very different opinions on movies from mine. So I wrote a review of Friday the 13th, which just excoriated it. And she's like, hey, Phil, that's my favorite Friday the 13th flick. Okay, write a review on it. I'll happily post it as a rebuttal. And we did,
Yeah.
It's just a discourse, anytime, I've spent a lot of time with language. I have 2 degrees in English. I love language. I love talking. I love communicating. I love listening to people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that there's that forum to do that when you have a website or a blog where you can say, hey, you know what, here are voices. Let's put them out there. And you know what? I don't have a huge following. I know that. But that's okay, because the people that do read me appreciate what they read,
Yeah.
And if I can get your piece on Wes Craven out there, or Nicole's piece on Friday the 13th, Part 5, then that's something that I've done and gets it out there. And, so if some people enjoy it, that's the end goal, right?
Oh yeah. No, and
Yeah.
I mean, being able to have different viewpoints on movies is always really fun. That's one of the things that I've started to branch out with as far as the podcast, as far as interviewing people. I had, this one podcast earlier in the year where a filmmaker I've met uh, online over the years, I've reviewed a few of his films. We ended up talking about Scorsese for about an hour and his Faith trilogy earlier this year. And it's like that's the type of, and some friends of mine and I want to talk about Star Wars. Other friends of mine and I want to talk about horror films or David Lynch, and just being able to get those different voices that you wouldn't necessarily hear from otherwise. Yeah, that I completely understand the impulse, and it's like I think that's one of the things that when I've had the chance to sit down and read what you have on Death Ensemble, it's like that's one of the things I like is you've got different people projecting. I mean, obviously, the central voice is yours, but you're also able to incorporate other people's opinions on films and filmmakers as well. I mean, that's one of the that's ultimately that's such a I think that's such an important thing to going from just being a blog about movies or just a particular subject, and more like trying to build a larger community too.
Sure, absolutely. You know, it's all about getting voices out there. That's what writing is about. That's what communication is about. And I'm very, I don't have a huge following on Death Ensemble. I know that. I mean, if you look at something like, I'm not going to use the real names, but if you look at something like, Gory Disgusting, or Deadhead Central, those sites have 25 articles a day.
Yeah.
I might not have that in a month. I'm a restaurant manager. I work a full-time job. I travel 3 hours a day. But if I can get quality pieces up there and I can get interesting perspectives out, that's what matters to me.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you said, I know now, because when I first started Death Ensemble back in 2011, it'd be like, okay, this is D. Wallace week, or George Romero Film Review week. And then, 3 weeks come by. It's like, okay, so maybe it was George Romero 3 weeks, because I know I haven't gotten what I got to do. So I learned not to put the word week on anything anymore after
Yeah.
that. But if I can get my writing out there, and I can do interviews, 'cause that's my favorite part of running the blog. I tell people that all the time. I interviewed Ken Sagos last week at a convention, from the guy from Dream Warriors. If I can talk to people and get movie reviews and put up opinions about things, that's the kind of stuff I like,
Hmm.
and that's the kind of things that my readership enjoys. So it's all good stuff.
Yeah. Well, you touched on it earlier, and as far as sort of where horror how horror sort of became your niche, as far as Death Ensemble and your writing in general, what is it? And I'm just out of curiosity, what is it about horror other than other genres that sort of resonates with you more than other genres do?
Well, it's not any one thing. It's a combination of things. I'll start with when I was a kid. Um, as many of us did in America, I had a dysfunctional family. I grew up in a very middle class white neighborhood. I should have had the perfect life. White picket fence and all that. Dad's making good salary, mom's home. And it wasn't that. You open the doors to those houses, and there's all kinds of horrors going on inside. So part of the thing with horror was, it was an escape from the horror in my own life.
Mm-hmm.
So I could get away from that by turning on a movie, or reading a Stephen King book, or picking up a Robert McCammon short story collection. I could get away from the real horrors, and then I couldn't control that stuff in my real life. When I'm sitting down and I'm reading, and then eventually writing horror stories or writing reviews or whatever, now I'm actually taking something that was uncontrollable, and I'm controlling it.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's something where it's easy for me to say, okay, now I have ownership over it. So that's one thing. And I've always loved the fact that horror, you can do all sorts of things in horror that you can't in other genres.
Mm-hmm.
You can have all kinds of stuff happen in a romantic comedy. You can't have somebody turn into a werewolf in a romantic comedy, for the
Yeah.
most part.
Yeah.
So it stretches the imagination and does all sorts of things that you can't do in other genres. And that's not saying that other genres are particularly limited. You can do all sorts of things, but
Mm-hmm.
horror is somewhere you can take that imagination. And this is why I've always loved supernatural stuff better than the slasher stuff, because it's just something that I can get away from what I'm reading in the paper, because if I can read about people getting killed in the paper, or I can turn on The Howling and watch somebody get killed by a werewolf, which is fun,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, oh my God, what a depressing world we live in. So
Yeah.
that's another part of it. And I have to admit, I've seen so many horror movies, and I've lived a lot of life at 45 now, that it's just that things don't scare me anymore. But there's a certain fun to getting spooked by things. There's a certain fun. That's why now when I watch horror movies, like I watched Autopsy of Jane Doe a few weeks ago for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
and that movie legitimately at points had me, and had goosebumps on my arms, and that's fun. And I think that part of the problem I've come across with horror lately is a lot of it is just dreary, depressing, tie somebody to a chair and kill somebody. And it took me a while to find some stuff that's come out recently that has that sense of, the things that go bump in the night, because it's
Mm-hmm.
fun to be scared. It's not fun for me to watch a body get mutilated, but it's fun for me to watch, like I said, a werewolf running around, a guy transforming into a werewolf is spectacular stuff.
Yeah.
It's a thrill ride. It's fun. So how about you? How did you get into horror?
Well, I mean, for me, like it's kind of happened in waves. Like when I was growing up, I actually somehow got my parents, or my I somehow got my parents to let me watch like the Friday 13th movies, Nightmare on Elm Street, and stuff like that at a younger age than I should have. I was like 9 or 10 or something like that.
Sure.
But I mean, I liked them, but it's like I didn't have that love for. I didn't really know what I loved about movies yet. I didn't really have that sort of analytical mind about about movies yet. So I mean, I
Sure.
enjoyed them, but that didn't necessarily stick for a while. When I got more into movies as I grew older, I would start to watch more movies that include horror. Admittedly, horror is something that I've sort of slid into without just necessarily going full bore into it. Although
Sure.
when I started uh, in, I think it was 2003 was the first year I did this. Uh, Starting in 2003, I was, writing on a regular basis about horror movies, and one of the things I wanted to do, and I had Netflix, and so basically, like all of the horror in October, all of the horror movies that in my Netflix queue would get pushed up to the front, and it's like I
Yeah.
sort of used that as an excuse to try to get my queue down considerably. Now, and also to watch some of these movies for the first time. I mean, I would incorporate other movies that I'd seen over the years, but ultimately, it's like I use it as a vehicle to sort of introduce myself to new horror movies. And when I started doing that, that's when my appreciation for the art of horror filmmaking, beyond just like generic slasher movies and all the cliches that go with like endless sequels and stuff like that, sort of came into view. I mean, I'm sort of like you. I'm much more interested in supernatural as opposed to slasher. Although I mean, I do enjoy a good slasher movie. I still enjoy the original Nightmare on Elm Street. I enjoy Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Like a few of the Friday 13th movies, the original Halloween, all of that stuff. But mostly, I over the years I'm especially a fan of the slow burn horror movie, basically stuff like The Shining, stuff like Nosferatu, stuff like Bride Frankenstein, just that, and The Conjuring, just stuff that doesn't really, that will take its time, that'll be patient and earn, to a certain extent, earns the whatever scares and suspense I feel like the movie can contribute. And
Because
so,
it's all about the payoff at that point. You
yeah.
know, you're building to the payoff. I think that's a problem with a lot of filmmakers nowadays. I don't think that enough filmmakers watch films. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think that part of the problem is that they don't, especially in the horror genre, where you can have an iPhone and a couple $100 and put out your own horror movie. You know,
Yeah.
but part of the problem with that is that you have no training, you have no technique, and I don't think that those people have. A lot of them don't anyway. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of them don't have an appreciation for how to build scares.
Yeah.
How do you build it, and what's the payoff? And you got to make the payoff worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it's just, hey, you know what? It's slaughter and this and that. But if you're not building characters and you're not building, I think one of the problems that I had with much of the movies in the '80s, once I got a little older, was like, oh my god, if you turn these characters sideways, you wouldn't see them. They're so thin, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's
But
funny
that's
because,
why something like that's. I'm sorry, I cut you off. But
no.
that's why something like Wes Craven. If we want to talk about Nightmare on Elm Street, I mean, you have Heather Langenkamp playing Nancy. That's an incredible character, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And Craven does that. He builds the scares and he builds the stuff, and it's not, hey, you know what, jump. It's not just throwing a cat out of a closet.
Yeah.
The old cat jump scare, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially when if you're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street, I mean, an important part that distinguishes that from Halloween and the endless sequels, Friday 13th and the endless sequels, is that that was an original idea. And just
Yes.
the hook of that movie, like somebody who will kill you when you're when you're sleeping. And how do you do that? How do you stay awake? And all the way he set up that universe. And I haven't seen all of the sequels, but I mean, I've seen Dream Warriors. That's really good. New Nightmare is one of my favorites of Wes's. And the fact of the matter is, it's like the fact that he set up that universe so well and that premise so well. And like you said, the characters, Heather Langenkamp is Nancy. I mean, even Johnny Depp as her boyfriend. And all of the characters that are just really there's not necessarily a wasted character in that movie. Every character is kind of important to that story in one way or another.
Sure, and Wes Craven is one of those guys that I find him very up and down, but when he's on, and his stuff is just like Nightmare on Elm Street or The New Nightmare. That stuff is next level.
Yeah.
It's next level writing, it's next level directing, and there's a guy who just knew how to capture it and how to put it on film. And unfortunately, like I said, throughout the course of horror filmmaking, especially since the '80s, there's not enough of that, and that's kind of a shame.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like you said, like Wes Craven's completely up and down. It's like one year he did Vampire in Brooklyn, which I couldn't stand. I
that movie is awful.
Terrible. But the next year he did Scream.
Yes,
And
exactly.
like, he within the same year in 2005, like he had Cursed, which was like basically Scream with werewolves, but was awful. It gone through recuts and rewrites and all of that stuff and refilm shooting and all of that. But then later that year, you saw Red Eye, and it's like, wow, he still has it. And yeah, I mean, just that, and yeah, I mean, and a lot of the really good, consistent horror filmmakers are kind of like that. It's like it just depends on the story. I mean, some are better, some are more consistent than others, but the fact of the matter is, it's like, yeah, it all depends on story. It depends on what your premise is, and you were talking about like people who don't even really watch movies or don't even really watch horror. It's like the first thing that came to mind was that god awful Michael Bay produced Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake.
Oh god.
Which is like, I was bored senseless watching this. I shouldn't be bored senseless watching this. I can watch the original and just be scared out of my wits.
I remember watching the Prom Night. Prom Night, the original Prom Night, is no great movie. Trust me on that.
Yeah.
But I remember watching the remake back in 2008, and I was legitimately pissed off. I was steaming while I was watching this thing because I'm like, okay, so who is this movie for? First off, you're taking a movie, and the whole remake thing was kind of funny because you're taking movies that so you're taking titles of movies that people love, and you're trying to get that crowd in, the older crowd. Yeah. But you're making movies that crowd's not going to like for younger audiences, and a lot of them are PG-13, just trash.
Yeah.
So, but those people are not going to care that this is some title from 30 years. It's a remix. So who are you trying to please here?
Yeah.
And those Michael Bay movies, the problem was that it was all about veneer, and it's all about the look, and it's glossy, and it's this and that, and there's absolutely no substance to any of that stuff. Marcus Nispel, the guy who directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, he did the Friday the 13th remake, and he did the Conan remake, and I'm like, does this guy have a single idea in his head of its own? Because it just seems like he's going to remake everything ever made and never make anything that's original, And that's kind of sad because Romero and Carpenter and Cronenberg and Hooper and Wes Craven, I can watch a Cronenberg movie that I've never seen before and not seeing his name on it. I can miss the opening credits and know it's Cronenberg.
Mm-hmm.
I defy myself to try to find that in any of these guys, And that's kind of sad because, the thing about film that makes it unique is you have these great visual aspects. It's storytelling stuff. And it's not supposed to be just about, okay, put the camera here, point A, put the camera there, point B, and then cut it together. And the art of editing and the art of filmmaking, I mean, a bunch of it is just not where it should be right now for the most part. And that's sad,
Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, you mentioned the Friday 13th remake, which, I mean, for the record, I actually liked that one, but mainly because of the fact that I felt like it combined the elements from both the first and second Friday 13th, which are the two best Friday 13th movies. And I think part of the reason why I didn't mind that one as much is because of the fact that it's like, it's such a simple premise. and B, like there are only 3 or 4 of the Friday the 13th movies that are even any good at all.
Yeah.
And it's like it's hard to you don't have to do much to really improve upon a lot of those films. And but yeah, I mean, and even you brought up Romero, and the fact of the matter is, even if you're watching his new, zombie movies, even if you're watching like a newer zombie movie and it's not as good as like Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead or Night of the Living Dead, it's like it still has something interesting to say.
That was the thing that has always fascinated me, and why Romero is by far my favorite horror director. That his, and again, it's by no means deep stuff. It's not profound, most of it, but he was somebody who had commentary to make on what was going on in society,
Mm-hmm.
and put that on film. You know, a lot of it's transparent stuff. I mean, the thing about consumerism in the mall and Dawn of the Dead, you don't need to look very deeply, but it's a point of view.
Yeah.
It's hey, here's Romero's point of view on what's going on. Romero was a progressive guy, and he had all kinds of thoughts and stuff. And it's great that he was able to put that stuff on film, because too many films don't. And again, it's part of what I was saying about the art of movie making being a big part of being lost, is that a lot of the stuff that comes out today doesn't have a voice. It's just it's just indistinct. Whereas Romero, if you look at his stuff, it's always about the families falling apart, society's falling apart, everything's falling apart,
Yeah.
the social structure's falling apart, and how are we going to make our way through that?
Mm-hmm.
And that stuff will always be relevant,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's 1968 with Vietnam and Night of the Living Dead, 1985 with Reagan and the militarism, and today with what's going on in politics now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and what was the found footage Dead movie he did? It was after
Diary of the Dead.
Diary of the Dead, and it's like
Yeah.
I saw him like that's actually, I mean, that's a pretty good idea. I mean, of course they hadn't, it come out shortly after like Cloverfield, and so the newer found footage idea was still something of a novelty. Like Paranormal Activity hadn't come out and just completely like ruined that idea for everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's like, wow, you've got this. It's a first person ground level, zombie movie, and it's like, I mean, obviously, it's like you've got protagonists and good guys and bad guys, and protagonists in every movie, but it's like that the idea of having the movie be that telling a zombie movie in that way was such a novelty, and it's such a it makes sense that's where he took it. And yeah, like you said, I mean, all of those movies are social commentary for the time that they were made, and that's one of the things that franchise, as up and down as it can be, I mean, as up and down as any franchise can be, it holds up because of the fact that Romero has something very distinct to say about it.
Well, that was one of the things that I always loved about the Romero's Dead movies too, because you want to talk about franchises, you look at Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. It's very rare that you have a follow through with one person directing and writing them.
Yeah.
So you have, like, if you look at Friday, and again, the Friday the 13th movies are pretty much all the same.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at each one, it's like, okay, well, this guy is taking it this way, and this guy after him is taking it this way, and I didn't see it going that way because this is now nothing like the original, but even though it's got the same exact idea,
Yeah.
Whereas with Romero, or, and I'm not a big fan of Child's Play, but, that guy, I forget his name, Dominic something or other, has written all of them,
Mm-hmm.
So there's a through line, instead of just, okay, well, here's the next random slasher because it's 365 days later and we got to put something out by the 13th of this month.
Yeah, and it's funny. One film podcast I'm actually listening to is 80s All Over, and it's going through the 80s 1 month at a time. And it's fascinating when they get into the horror films that are coming out like each month
Yeah.
of those years. It's just it's fascinating to see just sort of the trends that hit upon, and then once Friday 13th is, like, you get all of these different slasher movies, and it's like, yeah, I could probably skip a few of these,
Well,
but
that's part of the problem, though, with filmmaking. That's as far as the industry goes, that things are very trendy.
yeah,
You know, so Friday the 13th break huge. It's this little film that Sean Cunningham makes out in the middle of nowhere. You know, he's got to get investors and stuff. You know, it's not like some big tentpole film that Paramount said, okay, we're going to throw $1 million or 10 million or whatever it was back at the time. You know, and that comes out, and all of a sudden that makes a gazillion dollars that summer, and all of a sudden now you have a million copycats.
yeah,
You know, you talked about Scream. Scream is a great film. Kevin Williamson does some next level writing on that stuff, and it's
mm-hmm.
amazing that what he and Wes Craven were able to do with that, because that is really a thinking man's horror film, and it's really
Oh
impressively
yeah,
done. And then you get the stuff that follows, like I Know What You Did Last Summer, which was written by Williamson, and I still can't believe that because
yeah,
you know here's Scream, which is all about okay, we're going to make fun of these conventions, and then you get to I Know What You Did Last Summer, and it's every convention that he was making fun of a year ago in Scream.
yeah,
But the thing is, then you have stuff like Valentine and all that. You have a bunch of stuff that's meta. All of a sudden, meta horror is the thing, and that's
mm-hmm.
big for a while. You know, 28 Days Later comes out, and in 2004, and the first Resident Evil film come out, and all of a sudden now zombies are popular. So
Yeah,
it's the trend. You know, back in the mid 2000s to late 2000s, you know, you have the whole remake thing, which is fine. You know, I understand that you got to hop on where the dollar's going, but I kind of like the fact that just like I was telling you about on my website, I want to hear other voices that are outside that.
mm-hmm.
You know, and that's why I'm really fortunate that I've made some really nice connections with some horror makers on the indie level in the New York area. I
Mm-hmm.
live in Flushing, Queens. You know, so I've made some connections with indie filmmakers, and I'm realizing that there's all sorts of great stuff going on the underground right now, where it's stuff it's counter to the glossy $10 million, $50 million, however many millions you want to put. I mean, we're not even talking close to $1 million with the films I'm talking about. So I'm looking at people that are able to put those distinct voices of theirs in and make it something that is theirs and it's unique. And it's a nice antidote to whatever's at the box office, Annabelle creation or whatever, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I've liked as far as when I started to get screeners and requests for reviews from independent filmmakers, and it's like these are filmmakers. It's like I don't go to film festivals. I don't really have access to film festivals, so I'm probably not going to see these movies outside of this. And it just completely expanded my horizons as far as what's going on in films, and it's more exciting than what's going on in mainstream films a lot of times. And
Yeah,
just
certainly.
being able to get to know these people and see how their voices expand over the years, and how seeing how one filmmaker will do a drama one year and the next year he's doing a horror movie, and it's like it just it's so it's been so invigorating for me as a film fan to be able to get in touch with those people and to really understand that it's like there's a lot more going on than I realize, and it's like I need this I need these filmmakers in my life to sort of keep my enthusiasm. I mean, not just to keep my enthusiasm up, but to keep up with, you know, I don't mind if I miss certain films in theaters because it's like, I'm kind of interested in it, but not really. But
Sure.
it's like that just, chances are I'm glad because of the fact that then there's another film from another filmmaker who I'd never heard of before who, probably isn't going to who shamefully will probably not get like a 2,000, 3,000 screen release in their career, which is a damn shame. But their movie is so much better than what I'm missing at the theater. And it's like, because, and sort of like you, I've got a full time job. I've got all sorts of things going on to where it's like I don't have time to get to movies and theaters as much as I used to. And on the one hand, I'm disappointed in that because I'm do miss movies that I do want to see, but at the same time, it's like I've got this other outlet. I've got these other films that I'm getting a hold of that are augmenting my movie going and also invigorating, the my years beyond just seeing what's out in the movies. And yeah, that's been one of the more exciting things for me, certainly.
And now you work for a theater company, right?
I do. I do. I'm an assistant manager at a Regal down here.
So how do you think that adds to your experience as I mean, obviously your entire lifestyle is built around film. So how do you think that adds to it, your job, if it does at all?
Unfortunately, well, I mean, my wife and I actually both work at movie theaters, so basically, unless it's at a theater that like neither of us, that's not at either one of our companies, it's like I'm getting into a movie for free. So I mean, that
Yeah.
helps, but the fact of the matter is, it's like unfortunately, it's I yes, I would love to like utilize going to see free movies like every weekend, stuff like that, and going to see movies that I want to see that we get that's coming out. But I mean, it. I think part of the reason why it's been nice for me to get a whole because of the fact that sometimes my work schedule is so erratic, whether I'm working during the day or working in the evening. It's like that will determine sort of when I get a chance to watch these movies that filmmakers are sending me, for review. And it's like
Sure.
I think that's part of why I've a lot of shorts have shown up on Sonic Cinema over the years, and it's like
Yeah.
because of the fact that it's like they're easy to watch. They're easy to watch before work, and I can either I'll have the review done before I leave for work, or I can think about it and I can finish it easily after work. And I mean, it doesn't really it help working at a theater helps because of the fact that I get free movies.
Sure.
And unfortunately, and I don't have access to screener critic screenings or anything like that. So that's how I have to see movies. And so it's like that's so I feel privileged to be able to I feel kind of privileged and kind of honored to have these filmmakers send me their films, and it's like I'd like your feedback on it. And the thing is, it's like they, you know, in most more cases than not, they appreciate my feedback regardless of whether it's positive or negative.
I'll tell you what, to be honest, there's nothing more flattering than somebody hitting me on Facebook or hitting me in my email and saying, "Hey Phil, I like your stuff. I like your site. Can you do me a favor and check this out for me and review it for me?"
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's a horror film. Maybe it'll be great. And again, same thing that you said, that I've given negative criticism to stuff that people have sent me. I've given negative criticism to people that I consider friends now.
Yeah.
But I've never had the holy shit. How could you say that about my film?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
fortunately, I've been able to get with some really good people who are looking for legitimate feedback. They want to get it out there. And my website, I go again, the mega conglomerate sites, they're never going to cover those type films, and it's nice to be able to review that stuff and help some people out. Promote and support stuff I really believe in.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
that's great.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've found over the past couple of years, especially starting to talk to these filmmakers for the podcast. It's like I feel like if I can bring these people's art and these people's voices to somebody who will have never heard of them otherwise because they're not in 3,000 theaters on an opening weekend, that makes it worthwhile because it's like I feel like I'm helping these people. They're helping me in, promoting my reviews, saying, "Hey, this is a review that I got for my movie. Thank you very much." And it's like I'm helping them because of the fact that it's like I'm giving them genuine feedback that they're going to take to heart and they're going to appreciate. And it's like that's been really rewarding because the fact of the matter is it's like the next Thor movie is going to sink or swim with or without my review. But I mean, I've had filmmakers who've said your review is one of the first ones that came out, and it's like it really helps get some momentum going on my film and getting it into festivals and stuff like that, and being able to quote that as, "Hey, this is what some people are saying about my movie," and it's like,
and that goes right back around to what I was saying when we first started this conversation, you and I, that sense of community. It's horror specifically for me, but even just the film community in general. When you make those kind of connections and you meet people and you review their stuff and they use your reviews in on DVD covers or whatever, and your voice gets out there and their voices get out there, and it's forming a community. It's taking something that the whole thing about quote unquote social media is that it's supposed to be social.
yeah,
Where a lot of it to me is, hey, this is people hiding behind a screen instead of going out and doing what they whatever they would do in their normal lives. But the thing is that when you form that sense of community, whether it's Death Ensemble or Sonic Cinema, and you build that kind of community within, and you meet people and you network, that's great. That's using social media and the internet to do something positive. And I think that's awesome. That guys like you and me, look. I don't have any formal training in reviewing. I've never gone to class for film reviews. I've read a ton of stuff in my life. I've written a ton of stuff. I'd like to say that I have a very talent for writing. A very large talent for it. But I'm not classically trained. But I know what I can put out there. I know how to write. And if people appreciate that and that builds a sense of community, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's like I've got, some of these filmmakers, other filmmakers that they know are going to search me out and I get to know them and all of this. And it's like, yeah, that sense of community in film criticism and in filmmaking, it's something that social media and the internet really enhances in really surprising and really rewarding ways in a lot of cases. And that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed most as I've started to realize that my focus should be more and more on my voice as a critic and somebody who talks about movies, who lives and breathes movies quite literally, and just really appreciates the art form and turning people on to a movie that they wouldn't have heard of, or even if it's just a short film, even if it's a feature film, and some of these get picked up for distribution, and it's like all of that is extremely exciting to see and rewarding to be able to see. It's like, wow, these, it's like I know that person, and this is I'm I feel like this was, I feel honored to be a part of their journey as an artist, even if my own journey, because I mean, ultimately, originally, when I went to college, it's like I wanted to do film music, and to a certain extent, I still do. I still want to do film music. I still want to contribute in that way, but I realize that's ultimately, if that ever if that ever happens, great. If it doesn't happen, I've come closer and closer to accepting that's just not what I'm supposed to be doing. What I'm supposed to be doing as a fan of film, as somebody who loves film, is helping people, ultimately with my criticisms and commentaries on films, whether it's a review of the next big Marvel movie or especially something independent that people aren't necessarily going to see otherwise.
Now you're also writing a book, right?
I've started writing a book. I haven't gotten as far with it as I'd like, but I mean, yeah, it's something that I definitely it's it's very much a memoir what I've worked on. And a friend of mine who's helped design Sonic Cinemas suggested doing a review book first and foremost, which will probably be easier for me to do before I uh, do the heavier, more personal book. But the fact of the matter is, yeah, I have started writing a book, and basically about my life, but also tying it into films that I love, and because there are a lot of significant moments in my life that I recognize, I identify with certain movies in a lot of ways, and so that's something that when I do get to finishing that book and putting it out there, that'll come through pretty vividly. I mean, if you've read the reviews for some of those movies, that comes through as to why those movies you already kind of know why those movies landed with me the way they did.
Sure.
Um, going back to one of the thing, and I talked about to bring it back to specifically horror for a minute. Although that was I love having that discussion with you about like community and social media and how critics and filmmakers can sort of help each other in terms of the larger film community. Going back to specifically horror, you mentioned Supernatural was more your is more part of the horror genre that you appreciate over
Yes.
slasher films. What are some of your favorite horror movies?
I read something that Roger Ebert said one time. I read something where he said, he was talking about rankings, and he said, it's not like he was trying to say that ranking is unproductive, and saying that this is the greatest of all time, or like he was saying that for instance, like 8.5 might be the best film for this, but if you're looking for something else, maybe you're looking at something Scorsese did or whatever.
Yeah.
So I have what I call my Phil Faso six pack at the top of my horror collection.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to pick an absolute favorite, it would probably be The Omen, though. I've always loved that.
Mm-hmm.
I think Richard Donner is an underrated filmmaker.
I agree with that.
The Omen is one of those things where it's just a combination of great acting, directing, an incredible score.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great story. And I watched it again a couple months ago. I've seen it 150 times over the last God knows how many years, and it still scared the hell out of me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, The Omen is really good, and I completely agree with you about Richard Donner. I mean, he's one of the more underrated filmmakers. It's tragic that he hasn't. It's sad that he hasn't made a movie since 16 Blocks, because it's like I really miss his movies because of the fact that I mean, even something like Timeline is gonna be fun. It's not gonna be good necessarily, but it's gonna be fun. But yeah, I mean, I know when I first saw The Omen, which was probably about 10, 15 years ago or so. I mean, it was somewhere around there. I knew Richard Donner from like Goonies and Lethal Weapon and all of that stuff. So I mean, I would in Superman, and it's like, so when I saw The Omen, I'm like, I did not see this coming from Richard Donner, but it's like, no, it's a fantastic movie.
And getting back to what I was saying about the whole franchise thing that discussion we were having before, the Damien Omen 2 and the Final Conflict are not nearly as good as the first film, but I also like the fact that that's a trilogy where the sequels actually you have character growth, and the story is actually moving forward. Damien, at one point he's 5 years old in the original, and then the second one he's coming into his power and he's 12, and then in the third one he's in his 30s, and all of a sudden he's ready to take over the world. So there's a growth there. Whereas, if you want to talk Friday the 13th, I think that Jason becoming a zombie in part 6 is probably the only character growth you've ever seen for that character.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny with Friday the 13th, and it's like they had that weird, I think it was like 3 through 6, where you had like Tommy Jarvis, who basically became the protagonist. It was like him versus Jason. Yeah. And it's like, and number 6 is the final part of that. And I mean, one, you were talking about, like, I think you mentioned something about like sequels just sort of going in different directions. Like, I hadn't seen Jason Lives, the 6th one, for like 20 some odd years when I saw it again, like in 2009. And I completely forgot that is very loony, and just there's a weird strain of comedy that goes through that movie that is just very unlike any other Friday the 13th movie.
Absolutely.
It's like, that is such a weird take. But I mean, it was also one of the few movies in that franchise that I think was actually, the director was also the writer. And it's like the fact that he decided, oh, well, we're gonna make this completely insane and completely ridiculous humor. And it's like, it works in that respect because of the fact that it's like, it feels natural for that story that they decide to tell. It's like, look, we're going to go completely bonkers here.
And it's dumb fun, Yeah. It's not grim. It's just, hey, I'm going to turn this on ear and make it silly.
Yeah.
It works. It works in that film. It does.
Mm-hmm. If only they had remembered that when they did Jason Takes Manhattan, which still absolutely. I remember I didn't see it until like 5-6 years ago or so, but that title always stuck with me. It's like, I always loved the idea of Jason Taking Manhattan. And then I see it, and it's like, it's only the last 20 minutes that take place in Manhattan. Like,
which actually mostly is taking place and being filmed in Vancouver, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, really, Jason takes a boat on his way to Vancouver.
Yeah. It was just, like, and the thing is, it's weird to say that movie was such a disappointment for me, but I think it really kind of was, but it was because of the fact that I had this built up, just how awesome that idea is of Jason Taking Manhattan in my head for so long, and then I see the movie, it's like, no, that just doesn't. No, that's.
I'll tell you what. I'll tell you something funny. I saw that when I was. Actually, saw that in the theaters in whatever came out. And I was like 17, 18 years old when that movie came out. It was the first Jason I'd ever seen in a theater, and I remember getting to the end, and I was furious. So I watched it about a year ago because I decided that it was December of last year, and I decided I was gonna review I reviewed a few of them, but I was gonna go through all the Paramount Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
And I watched it, and I was literally shaking my fist and screaming at my television while I was watching it. I'm like, this is just awful.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, but yeah, I mean, if it had just gone forward and just said, for no reason whatsoever, like, Jason's in Manhattan and he's killing people, if that had just been the movie, it's like, just take Crystal Lake out of it for a movie and just put him in Manhattan for some reason, just let him do his thing. It's like, that would have been such a better movie. It still would have probably been terrible from an artistic standpoint. It still would have been stupid, but at least it would have been honest.
Well, but that's one of the ones, I think that one was one of the ones, too, where the writer and director were the same guy. And I remember reading recently that the boxing match with the guy Julius that takes place on the roof of the building was supposed to the writer or director was going to include actual, landmarks. So that was supposed to take place inside Madison Square Garden. You know.
Yeah.
Instead, they film it on a roof in Vancouver because the budget's 10 cents instead of $2 million. You know.
Yeah. And I think that was the last. That was the last Paramount Friday 13th because New Line had Jason Goes to Hell and the rest of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those movies have their own separate issues.
Yeah. Yeah, Jason X was the first one I had seen since I was a kid. I hadn't seen 7 through 9, and Jason X just ticked me off when I saw it. I saw it like shortly after it came out, but was the first one I had seen in like 15 years, and I'm like, this is not good. It's basically an alien movie.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So how about you? What are your favorite horror films?
Well, I mean, pretty much anybody who follows me online as far as Facebook and personally knows that, I mean, Kubrick's The Shining, we've talked about it recently. Kubrick's The Shining is my favorite horror movie of all time for a lot of reasons. I just love the atmosphere. I love the way Kubrick directs it. I love the performances, even though, I mean, you could argue, Jack Nicholson goes completely batshit insane. But it's like, I love that it's a Kubrick horror film. And it's like, I know that
Sure.
Kubrick's not necessarily your cup of tea, as we discussed in that one thread when we were talking about it and King adaptations recently.
Yeah.
But I love the soundtrack. I love the way he does he uses music in his movies. I love the way he and Garrett Brown shot that with the Steadicam. I just love everything about that movie. It's just such, and one of the things I like about that movie is that is, even though it doesn't take Jack long to go crazy in that movie, it's like the ultimate slow burn horror movie for me because of the fact that it's like there's not really much horror. There's not really much actual killing and scares. It's just this build up to the moment when you really see that Wendy and Danny are in real danger with Jack being the way he is.
Sure.
And so I mean,
there's one amazing shot in that film and it sticks with me to this day. And again, this is nobody's favorite shot in that movie but mine, I'm sure. There's a shot when he's driving up to the Overlook Hotel at the beginning, and he's going up that icy mountain, and there's that long tracking shot, and it's a camera shot, it's a helicopter shot from above, and he passes, I think it's a Volkswagen, or he passes another car that looks like it's stuck on the side of the road. And I always think about that guy who's stuck on that mountain on that side of the road. And I'm like, well, that guy's probably going to die up there.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. When I watch that this coming month, I really need to look for it. I don't think I've ever really noticed there's a car stuck in that scene.
That's one of those things that I picked out years and years ago when I saw it as a kid. And again, I understand why people love that. It's not my cup of tea. I'm not a Kubrick fan,
Mm-hmm.
And if I were a Kubrick fan, I'd love that film.
Yeah.
But so that's great. I think it's great that we have horror films that we can really I can go back to you can go back to The Shining anytime. And see things that you love. Like, I love the original, one of my six-pack movies is the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Mm-hmm.
And all these years, every time I watch it, I'm seeing it a different way. So at one point, I'm watching it as, this great romance between Kevin McCarthy's character and Dana Winter's character.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tragedy on that level. On another level, I'm watching here's this small town and everything's normal, and then everything goes completely unhinged.
Mm-hmm.
I think those type of movies are great, where you can go to something and get something different out of it, depending on what mood you're in every time you watch.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know that there are too many horror films that really do that for me. I mean, the ones that I really like, I mean, it kind of goes. Most of them are basically the same type of movie over and over. Like I love Nosferatu. As far as silent horror, I love Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. As far as silent horror, I love Horror of Dracula, the Hammer adaptation, the first Hammer Dracula film with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing.
Yeah.
I love I like the Ring. I like The Grudge. I like the American versions of those. I think they do a good job at what they're trying to do. I know, especially if you have seen the Japanese films, I kind of understand why people don't necessarily like those or they're too Americanized and stuff like that. That's completely fair. I love Roger Corman's Mask of the Red Death. And it's weird because of the fact that it's like that in Horror of Dracula. It's like it in a way it's sort of completely different from The Shining because of the fact that it's like those films are just big theatrical horror movies where it's like if they weren't horror movies they would basically be period dramas. They just happen to be horror movies. And it's like, so for me, the pendulum sort of goes back and forth as to the type of horror movies that I like. I mean, one of the things that I like trying to do is I try to introduce myself to one or some familiar ones that I've heard of that I haven't seen each month. Some years I stick to kind of ones that I've seen before, have previously seen. Some years I try to throw in a lot of sort of obscure ones I haven't necessarily heard of, but it's like, yeah, that sounds interesting. Maybe I'll check that out. And, sometimes it'll be a movie that I haven't seen, but I know I need to see because of the fact that it's supposed to be a pretty great movie. And, yeah, I mean, my tastes are not necessarily, I don't necessarily have particular tastes. It's like, I love The Shining, but it's like I also don't mind a good slasher film. And it's like it depends on sort of how I look. It's the movie, and it's the way it presents the story that matters to me. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
I think that's great.
Mm-hmm. So, what are the other movies in your six-pack of movies that you
So I covered Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
I just was fascinated by that when I first saw it, and my mom years ago when we first watched it on TV on Channel 9, local channel, she told me that. And again, that's one of those movies where if you don't know what's coming at the end, you'd be awfully surprised.
Yeah.
So my mom told me that when she went to see that, when it was out in the theater, she was 18 at the time. She went to a theater to see it, and she bought a ticket, and they let her in before the previous run of the show had ended. So she saw the ending, and she was blown away. And then she sat and watched the rest of the film. She was like, "What is going on here?"
Oh man, yeah, that sucks.
So excuse me. I talked about The Omen. I talked about Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So The Thing, John Carpenter's version of The Thing is just, I hate the cold to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think he perfectly captures paranoia, and the whole vibe in that film is just amazing. You have an anchor performance by Kurt Russell, doing some of the best work of his career in that flick. And again, I'll put my money on Rob Bottin's special effects in that, pound for pound best special effects I've ever seen. There's stuff in that he did with practical that you couldn't pull off with a computer. I don't care how good your computer program is. It's not going to come close to matching what he did in that flick.
Yeah.
And that was one of those flicks that came on. I remember that and Alien, the original Alien, the first one when I was a kid. those were two of those movies that would show on Showtime and HBO when we first got cable when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I'd be up at 3 in the morning watching those flicks on a Saturday, just amazed at what I was watching.
Mm-hmm.
So there's Cronenberg's The Fly. Again, if you want to do a masterclass on how to do remakes the right way, show people The Thing and The Fly.
Yeah. No, both of those are fantastic. I mean, I had heard about John Carpenter's The Thing for years, and when I finally saw it, I absolutely loved it. Like, like you did. And it's like it's like the fact that they're isolated, the fact that the cold and all of that stuff, the fact that there's no real escape, and I think that's one of the other things that I really like about The Shining, and it's funny because of the fact that it's like when I first got into projection at the movie theaters, like being up there at night kind of freaks me out because of the fact that you're the only one up there and it's not that well lit. But the thing is, it's like the more I got into horror, the more I started watching movies like The Shining and stuff like that. I sort of got over that, and it's like it just sort of like now I have no problem like going in for a 6 a.m. I'm supposed to be there at 6 a.m. for the church that meets there on Sunday. It's like I don't mind blasting the soundtrack to The Shining. When I'm the only person in the theater. It's like when I'm the only person in the building. It's like I'm fine with that. It's like, should I necessarily be 15 years ago? Would I be doing this? No. Now I'm fine with it. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on both of those. And yeah, the Fly is probably one of the. Both of those are just like great examples of doing a remake and doing it right, and because of the fact that you're not just remaking it, you're like doing your version of it, and it's like I think that's the thing that makes those movies in particular stand out when it comes to horror remakes.
And then the last movie in my six pack is The Howling. It's one of those movies again that when I was a kid I'd watch on TV. It's just like there's this crazy werewolf coven outside of California. And again, the transformation. Again, Rob Bottin's special effects are amazing in that film. So and I should say this, that if you look at those endings, the endings to those 6 films, I have found out that I am a fan of horror that ends tragically and not so great for the main characters. I do definitely appreciate the bleak ending on things.
Yeah. And
that goes back to something that I read Romero. I've seen plenty of interviews where Romero has said that, he was saying as a horror filmmaker, he didn't understand the whole thing of if you're going to rock the apple cart, why reset the cart? If you're going to shake things up, you shouldn't, it doesn't make much sense to have everything be stabilized at the end and the heroes win right off into the sunset, because you're projecting a world that's not, it's a dark place, and it's, again, that imagery of rocking the apple cart, And I think that has always been my point of view on things, and that's why I appreciate horror that, ends bleakly often for the heroes. Because, there's nothing more insulting than watching characters survive things that, they should never survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I'm watching that Godzilla flick that came out a couple years ago, and I'm like, this is, these characters, you might as well have Wile E. Coyote instead of that kid from Kick-Ass on the screen,
Yeah.
This is an elastic life. This guy's never going to die, and he's living stuff that no normal human being would ever close to live.
Yeah.
Might as well give him an Acme box with some dynamite in it, So yeah, that's where I'm at as far as my favorite horror flicks go. It's nice that it's nice to know that I can always go back to those films, and I can watch like the original King Kong's one of my favorites. I can watch those type films, and it's encouraging when I see films coming out that give me that same sort of feeling of fun and things that go bump in the night when I watch new stuff.
Yeah.
And they're a little more few and far between than I'd like, but it's encouraging to know that there's still stuff out there that I can appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we wrap it up here, I mean, Grant, I feel like we could probably do at least another half hour or so, based on the way we're going. But what do you have anything coming up soon as far as Death Ensemble? Any articles that you're working on?
I have a whole backlog of reviews. You know, part of my problem is I have a commitment to excellence, is what I like to call it. I know that I can coast by if I wanted to on some of the stuff that I've gotten drafts of, and I'm like, but it's not up to my standard. Mm-hmm. So I have a whole bunch of reviews of stuff that I've got coming up, including some stuff from those indie guys that I've met that I was talking about. So I've got some of their, reviews of their stuff. And, the thing, I guess the big thing is that I was just at the New Jersey Horror Convention over the weekend. That's the first time I've been to that one. It's a new thing. So I'm going to be writing up a review. Hopefully I'll have posted by the weekend. And the other thing is that I was privileged enough to talk to Ken Sagos while I was there. My favorite Dream Warrior, Kincaid. So I'll be posting that audio on that soon.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, the website is Death Ensemble, and it's just www.deathensemble.com, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And it's been so great to talk to you today. I mean, I'm glad we finally got a chance to do this. I definitely don't want it to be the last time we talk. Definitely want to talk again.
Brian, I had a ball, and I would happily do this again sometime.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, and thank you very much for joining me. And I'm going to turn the record off here shortly. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Phil Faso from Death Ensemble for joining me today.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate him wanting to do this, and it was really great to be able to talk to him, and definitely want to do it again. He's really got a great voice when it comes to talking about horror cinema. I definitely recommend it. And thank you very much for joining us. Until the next episode of Sonic Cinema Podcast, this is Brian Scuttle. We got a lot more coming up by the end of the year. Hope to do another Star Wars podcast with Ron, as well as a friend of ours. The three of us went to Star Wars Celebration. We'll probably talk a little bit about that. We'll probably talk about Last Jedi coming up. I definitely am going to probably talk again about horror at the end of the month, and just sort of what movies I watched at the end of the month, and sort of cap that this coming month. And hopefully I'll be talking again with one of the filmmakers I've already talked to about the work of Andrei Tarkovsky. So for now, this is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining us for the Sonic Cinema Podcast. Goodbye.